Hi everyone, it's Heidi again. Today we're reacting to a video called 25 Common Misconceptions About the United States That Simply Aren't True. I'm really interested to see if I agree with this video, or if there are some that I'm like, is it not that way? I'm really curious. If you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe. Really quickly, I'd like to thank the sponsor of this video, Soul Fitness. I've been able to try one of their exercise bikes, and I've been so pleased. I'm really happy to have this bike, especially being a pregnant woman now. Sometimes I don't want to go walking outside, it's too cold or too hot. I don't want to drive all the way to the gym to walk on the treadmill. So this bike has actually been perfect for me. It's the Soul G1M Plus bike. I'll have a link down in the description to get $100 off if anyone is interested. But Soul is basically a Peloton alternative. I put it together on stream. I was very distracted with my chat. So it took me a while. With the pictures, it was not too hard to follow. Some of the names were a little bit confusing. It was really fun though. Soul is really nice because it has a big TV connected to the bike where you can connect your phone, you can connect Netflix or YouTube. You can either have the sound coming out of the bike or have it coming into a Bluetooth headset. I also really like the Soul app. I used their free version for a little while before getting the opportunity to try the paid version. Even the free version was really nice. It has most everything you need. There are just some things that are restricted, like certain videos. Having the paid version is really nice because you have unlimited content basically. Cycling classes. It even has some yoga videos. One of my favorite things is that the Soul app has scenic rides. You click on a location and it kind of sends you through the streets of a certain city. Like you can ride your bike through France. It also arrived in really good condition. It's packaged very well. Nothing was broken. I haven't noticed any scuffs or anything. So that was also really nice. If you're interested in taking a look at Soul, it's significantly less expensive than Peloton and some other exercise bikes out there. I was just looking at Amazon and they are expensive. So if you're interested in getting a really good quality exercise bike for a lot cheaper, you can use the link in the description below or use the code HailHeidi at checkout, and I think you will not be disappointed. Thank you again, Soul, for sponsoring this video. Let's get to the reaction. That was really loud.
The United States often draws a lot of flack from the rest of the world for everything. From its foreign policy to the way it runs its domestic affairs. In fact, it seems like there are few things that can divide the world more evenly and more strongly than asking people what their opinion is of the United States. Everyone has an opinion. Even in the same city, you'll meet people who fall on the extreme sides of the spectrum. But what is it exactly that causes America to be so messed up? Even America's own politicians can't seem to stop talking about how messed up things are. Well, today we're going to take a deeper look. Are things really as bad as everyone seems to think they are? I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 common misconceptions about the United States that simply aren't true. And as a very important note, this list was produced by both a United States citizen and 2 European citizens that relocated to the United States. It's written to be as fair as possible.
Okay, I do like that. You have some in the States opinions and then people who have come from out of the States as well. It is so true that everybody has an opinion about the United States. I can see why. I've lived here my whole life. The more I learn about how other countries do things, sometimes I'm like, what are we doing? But I do know that there are some things that we do really amazing at. It has always entertained me that politicians complain about how things are run around here. Yeah, you gonna do something about it? But everyone's so divided, it's kind of hard to get things done in a productive way sometimes.
No, I'm not 2 Europeans. Or am I?
No, you're not.
All right, let's begin with a really common thought. Americans are ignorant about the world. Americans are held to an unrealistic standard. Since the rest of the world watch our movies and listen to our music, they know a lot about our country. But let's be honest, they never studied it. People actually complain that Americans don't even know that Czechoslovakia doesn't exist anymore. But neither does half the United Kingdom, and they're on the same continent. It turns out that all of us are pretty bad at geography. You'd think America would be better at it, however, considering another common thought is that America spends its days spying on everyone. And that's true, but who doesn't? Germany, France, Switzerland, Japan, Iceland, and all the rest of us spy on each other and ourselves. Moving on, America has been called
Interesting.
racist.
Oh, so we're moving on already. I know that I've been terrible at geography. I'm still learning. I play GeoGuessr and I'm trying to listen to BBC News just to get to know what's happening in what countries. I was talking to a friend the other day about how I've started to listen to BBC News more than like Fox News or CNN or an American-based news channel. And she said that she started trying to listen to BBC News, but sometimes she didn't even recognize some of the countries, or she got lost because it's talking about everywhere and not just here. Or not incredibly basic issues that are usually more common in American news media. And I thought that was interesting. I can definitely relate to her, but she actually stopped listening to BBC News because of it. I'm trying to continue to listen, even though sometimes I don't understand. I'm like, which leader was that? What was that guy's name? Where is he from? I'm trying. It's just something that is not common here. From my experience, it seems like Americans tend to not know geography as much as other countries, but that's just what I've noticed. I feel like if I ask you guys what you think, you're gonna say, well, yeah, Americans don't know geography as much. Have you guys noticed people in your own country not knowing geography very well, or you yourself not knowing geography very well, and maybe relating to Americans on this topic? Because I do think that you're going to find people everywhere who are not very familiar with geography, but it just seems to be really intense here. Who knows?
Please don't take this the wrong way. Racism definitely exists, and it makes the news. But you know what else?
That's the
America
problem.
also has a vicious media, and all of the world watches it, sometimes more than their own media. So when something super bad happens in other
crazy to
countries, it might not even make the back page. Next, it's a common misconception that Americans
Okay, that's so interesting. To think of a country watching our news and media and things like that more than their own is still really interesting to me and really mind-boggling. But I definitely agree with him that just because you see instances of racism, sexism, things like that on the internet, it doesn't mean that it's everywhere. The bad things are posted, and that's what people tend to focus on. And I think we forget that that's a very minor part of the population that just happens to get out for everyone to see. It's hard for people to not think that it's going on all around them when we are on the internet so much now that it seems to be our entire world.
don't use public transport. While it's true that we use cars a lot, many regions in America have great
Some
public
places
transport.
do, yeah.
Or at least just as good as Europe. Besides, what good is a train if
Very
nobody can
few
afford
places, I think.
it? Looking at you, UK. Moving on. America does / has / is fill in the blank. America is far from being a unified entity. Each state has its own laws, cultures, and quirks. Some states have the death penalty. Some don't. Some have strict gun laws, and some don't.
That is true.
Some have free college. Some don't. Some have tax, and
What states have free college? I wish I knew about this before I went to college, but that was surprising to hear for me.
yeah, some don't. So just like you can't say Europe is so-and-so, you can't say the same about the US. As an additional note, the states are far more independent than many of us realize. In fact, every state even has its own military, known as the Guard. Furthermore, some states
Sorry, I think someone was stomping upstairs.
pass legislation that
Maybe you guys can't hear it. I hope that you can't hear the stomping. Maybe I'll just ignore it.
directly contradicts the federal government. This is because in the US, the federal government is not the highest authority, the states are. To further establish the fact that America isn't a single entity, many believe that Americans only speak one language.
Sorry, really quickly. Sometimes state law can get around federal law in some aspects, but I don't know if I would say that state law is higher than federal law. I'll have to look into that a little bit more. Anyway, let me know in the comments if you know more about this topic. I'm a little confused.
To further establish the fact that America isn't a single entity,
Oh yeah,
many believe
languages.
that Americans only speak one language. But that's no
A
different
lot
from the rest of the
do,
world.
but-
Have you ever been to France? Or the UK, or Italy, or how about China? Most of them only speak one language too. That being said, over 20% of the US is bilingual.
So I think it's kind of funny because 25% is a good amount. It's a really good amount. But I guess if the majority of people only speak one language, just because there are some other countries that are also that way doesn't mean we're not that way. I think that you could still say, yeah, the majority of the United States only speaks one language, and that's not a misconception. That's true. Just because there are other countries that are doing the same thing doesn't mean that we're not. Anyway, I think that's interesting that he included that one in there.
Now, let's talk about the military, because people outside the US will preach that America's military does, again, fill in the blank. Nobody is naive enough to think that the US doesn't have selfish interests in mind when it invades a country. There isn't a nation on earth that would do that selflessly. But whenever the bad goes down, it's just as common for other countries to complain that America should do something. On a more or less lighter note,
a more or less lighter note.
Americans are fat. You ever been to the UK lately? There are even scandals because obese patients are getting turned down for surgery. Yes, America does have an obesity problem. But not all citizens are involved in it. I am. A big part of the United States is fairly health conscious and is consistently working to help the overweight population better their lives. Thanks, healthy people. And while we aren't perfect, many complain that America is worse than other developed nations in, well, everything.
So if he's moving on from the obesity issue, when we're out in public, when we go to restaurants or things like that, HailHeidi is not very skinny either. He'll even comment and be like, man, I need to lose some weight. Like, we look around and there's a lot of fat people around. It's significant and noticeable how many people around us are struggling with weight issues. Obviously, not every single person in the United States is fat. Obviously. That's how any generalization is anywhere in the world. You're going to find different kinds of people everywhere. Just some places you'll find more of this type of person than others. And I do agree that the United States is really struggling with weight. It's the food that we eat. It's the food that we're given. Even things that we're offered in the grocery store have weird ingredients that are not helpful for the human body. So I don't know if I'd count that as a misconception. I think that that's pretty accurate, and hopefully we can fix that problem.
There are many statistics, child mortality, literacy, etc., where the US falls behind countries like Norway and Iceland. But those statistics are based on averages. In Norway, most of the 5 million inhabitants are rich, white, and Norwegian. If you took a similar sample of rich white Americans in the US, you would find that the statistics are almost exactly the same. The fact is that the US is hugely diverse, and the American experience is completely different with and without money. Translation? The problem isn't healthcare or education, it's economic inequality, almost exclusively. And speaking of inequality, many make the simple but powerful assumption that America just isn't safe. This is usually what foreign citizens say until they actually come here. By this same logic, Paris, Brussels, London, Madrid, and almost every other city in Europe is unsafe as well. Yes, there are guns, but most Americans have never seen or heard a gun being fired. In fact, most Swiss citizens are much more familiar with gunfire than us Americans. All this being said so far, people still...
Really quickly, I could see maybe that in Switzerland, maybe they've heard gunshots more than Americans have or something. I think that a lot of Americans who have heard gunfire, it's not usually for a good reason. I think in Switzerland, they enjoy shooting guns in a safe way, kind of for sport, enjoyment, entertainment. And here, I think that a lot of people, and not everybody, of course, there are some people I'm sure who have never heard a gunshot in their life. But I know I have. Hearing gunshots going on can be really normal depending on where you live. So it would be interesting to see the percentage of Americans who have just heard random gunfire rather than you're up in the mountains shooting guns with your friends. That might be a little bit different here than, let's say, Switzerland.
Still expect all Americans to relish in a life of our stereotypes. Guns, fast food, and freedom! What I'm saying is a lot of the world looks at America as overly patriotic. But here's an honest question.
It's changing.
Have you ever met a Russian, Australian, a proud member of the UK? There's no shame in having pride in your country. Us Americans are definitely patriotic, but so is the rest of the world, as they should be. It's not a crime to be proud of where you came from. But that doesn't stop others from thinking we only complain and boast about America whenever we travel abroad. This is largely anecdotal. In America, Americans like to complain just like the rest of us. Only a few of them ever even leave the country, so you're meeting an unrepresentative sample. But in their defense, many times, they're right. Yes, this can hit hard in the pride spot, but maybe Europeans could stand to smile a bit more, right? No? Okay, fine, back to the
Depends on the
apathetic,
person.
leave me alone face. By the way, that part was written for our European representative, by our European representative.
That's funny.
I love all of you. Anyways, statistics viewed by outsiders show that the US is lagging behind. Similar to topics we've already discussed, there's another factor that we have to take into account: reporting. Every nation reports its own statistics. This means that making statistical comparisons between two developed nations, like the US and the UK, is an exercise in futility. The data is just too close and won't reveal much except that the US counts people one way and the US counts them another. That still doesn't make this misconception true. Americans are fake.
As far as the reporting misconception, I have no idea. I don't have much insight into that. If anybody in the comments has any idea, let us know.
Here's the thing. In Europe, citizens are almost proud of the fact that they're really standoffish. But once you get to know them, they're your friend for life. Well, here's a newsflash. Once you get to know an American, they'll also be your friend for life. The thing is, though, they don't use this as an excuse to be a jerk in the beginning. This list sounds great coming from an American.
Face friendly for sure.
I was totally the one who should have read this one, but I digress. On a totally different but very popular misconception, Americans are the only ones who call football soccer.
That's not
Actually,
true.
a lot of the world calls it soccer. Even parts of Ireland still call it soccer. Oh, what do I mean by still? I'm glad you asked. It was actually the British who coined the term soccer. The word soccer is an abbreviation of association and first appeared in universities in the 1880s, sometimes using the variant spelled soccer with a K. The word is sometimes credited to Charles Redford Brown, an Oxford University student said to have been fond of shortened forms such as brekkers for breakfast and rugger for rugby football. Britain actually started using the word football in the late 20th century, possibly because people incorrectly saw it as an Americanism. This next one,
I loved when I found out that we weren't the ones who started calling soccer soccer. It was people in England. It was the British first. And even though they stopped calling it soccer and we kept going, it's still really nice to be like, yo, blame them. They started it. It would be nice if we could all use the same terminology, but it's just kind of nice when someone's complaining about it and you say, hey, that didn't even start with us. They get real quiet, even though we're definitely very prominent in still calling it soccer. That tickles me though.
Kristen couldn't believe. Could you not?
No.
I'm learning something. To our American viewers, did you know that people in Europe make fun of you for using air conditioning? Why do they need it?
Do you guys make fun of the US for using air conditioning? Is it just like, oh, it's not necessary, we just don't use it? Americans probably make fun of Europeans more for not using air conditioning. I think it would be really nice for more and more places in Europe to use air conditioning, especially after visiting there in mid-July. There are some places that could really, really use it. This was made 4 years ago, so not too long ago. It could be that some of these maybe are a little less accurate than they were. Who knows?
Why don't they just leave the window open? Mosquitoes, at least in Florida. But here's why they might be joining us soon.
That would be nice.
During the 2003 European heatwave, 70,000 people died. This was in large part due to the fact that European homes and buildings are not typically equipped with air conditioning. While they laugh at the Americans for this, hotter summers are going to force them to take appropriate measures, especially since children and the elderly are very susceptible. Again, I stand by mosquitoes. I'm not opening my window in the summer. Winter, absolutely. Open windows.
Yeah, sure. I agree with that.
Moving into the top 9, that's a weird number. Top 9.
Top 9.
Many parts of the world accuse the United States of accounting for 25% of the world's carbon emissions. Not so nice. But it also accounts for 25% of the world's economic activity. The truth is that several nations, including countries like Canada, have higher per capita emissions than the US. Next, let's talk about how the world thinks Americans are ruining English.
I'm sure we have a lot, though.
Actually, Both British English and American English have diverged from a common 16th century ancestral standard, and in some ways, American English is closer to the original than British English.
Oh?
For example, American English has, for the most part, retained the language's rotosity, pronunciation of the R in words like hard, while British has, for the most part, dropped it. Furthermore, this shift
Did that used to be an older English thing to have hard R's? This is something that I'm not as familiar with, of course. Of course. Fascinating.
in British English happened around the time of the American Revolution when wealthier Londoners wanted to distinguish themselves from the lower classes. This is only one example, but it goes to show that British English is not an unchanging standard any more than American English. On a totally different note, did you know that Americans don't all live in the suburbs? Nope, not true. The fact is that in America, you have plenty of people that live in cities like New York, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, Chicago, Boston, and the list goes on. In fact, several regions of the United States are very European, like the Northeast Corridor, for example. The difference between the US and Europe is that if you want to live in the suburbs in the US, you can, but you don't have to. Now,
living in the cities is so expensive sometimes that it's not a very easy option for a lot of people, especially if you want to own your own property. Sometimes it's very difficult to live in the bigger city areas where you could use more public transportation, you could live closer to grocery stores and food places. And I think that most places in the world understand this, that the closer you get into the inner cities, the more expensive things get. Sometimes it would be really nice if you could step outside of a huge, busy city and still have access to things without having to hop into your car. So that might be the only difference. I know that there are some rural places in Europe as well where places are far away and you have to hop into your car. But here you really don't have to go very far out of a major city to get into that more rural type of feel where your house is a 45-minute walk from the closest grocery store.
Next one is just offensive. Americans are all dumb rednecks. While there are certainly Americans who fit this stereotype, the vast majority don't. Most Americans live in cities near the coasts. Most of them are educated, and most of them are not very different from Europeans in any significant way. Every country has a less educated populace that they themselves make fun of. Even sophisticated nations like Sweden and Switzerland. Fair warning, the last 5 on our list get a bit dark and crazy, starting with the idea that America is imperialistic. In many parts of Europe, the United States is seen as an aggressive imperial power, even more so than Russia and China. This is largely because our military presence both in Europe and everywhere else. But in our strong defense, Americans never forced you to watch our movies, quarter our soldiers, obey our laws, or get permission to leave your own countries. It was the Russians that did that, and much, much more.
I agree that we're not the worst. That is for sure. There are other places that are much, much worse when it comes to government power. Basically the imperialistic way of running things, I guess. We definitely aren't that bad. I agree with him on that one.
Food for thought, after World War II, the Americans liberated and left. The Russians liberated and stayed. All right, number 4 is sure to be a shocker to a lot of foreigners. Americans don't actually all walk around with guns. It's just not true.
Not all of us.
Except for a few places, the only people you'll ever see carrying guns in America are the police. In fact, you'll see more people walking around with guns in Switzerland than you ever would in America.
Switzerland laws are, at least the last time I checked, it was you can own guns, you can shoot guns, but they can't even be loaded unless you're like out there ready to shoot a target. If you guys have a different experience with that, or if the laws have changed since I've done some research on that, let me know. But I think that the big difference is that Americans carry guns around for self-defense. They are loaded. They are ready to come out and shoot at any time. Not everyone carries a gun. There are some places in the United States that are more populated with gun carriers than others. So I wonder how that comparison actually works when he compares Switzerland to America when it comes to how many people you'll see carrying a gun. To be honest, most people are concealed carriers where they'll have a gun on them, but it will be covered by a shirt. It's not very common that you'll see someone's gun when they're carrying it. They don't want to scare people. They're only carrying a gun for just in case situations. It's not to intimidate. It's not to be like, hey, look at me and my gun. That's not really how it works. Take that as you will. Kind of agree with him on this one, and I kind of don't at the same time. It's not super black and white.
Okay. We admit that, like most stereotypes, there is some truth to this next one, but it's been wildly blown out of proportion. Americans are all crazy Christian right-wingers. There's something so right about saying it with that accent.
But there are some.
Yes, there are a lot of Christians in America, and while some of them are crazy right-wingers, most of them aren't. In fact, if you ever get a chance to go and stay with one of those crazy Christian families, you'll see that most of them are just genuinely sweet people that go to church on Sundays.
That's true.
This next one sounds like a legit stand-up joke. If you get injured and can't pay for it, you'll just die in the street. Yeah, many people in Europe think this is what happens in America. As with most things that concern America, they're wrong. You can't be denied emergency medical care in the US. That would go against the Hippocratic Oath.
Yeah.
The difference is that you get a bill in the mail a few months later. Of course,
that is the big difference.
Another issue, but let's get into that right now. Americans are all in debt. Actually, European citizens carry more debt than Americans. The average household debt in the US, the OECD, is 113% of the household's income. In the UK, it's 156%. In Sweden, 173%. And in Denmark, it's a whopping 305%. So, what are some misconceptions about the US that you'd like cleared up? Or do you live in America and want to put a stereotype to rest? Let us know in the comments below, or tweet your answer to us at list25.
Interesting.
And as an American, I apologize for everything going on right now. Don't worry, 2020 is just around the corner.
Oh.
That's awkward. It is hard with the internet, things going viral. Even for me, sometimes it's hard to remember that not everybody is crazy sometimes. Like when he was talking about crazy Christian right-wingists. Yeah, there are definitely people like that, but not everyone is so radical. I think it's becoming a little more common for people to be more stern with their opinions and more I'm right, you're wrong type of thing. But I don't think everyone is so hostile about it as might be portrayed in media. Like looking at Twitter, seeing people's comments and how inhumane they can be. That's not how people act in real life. I think that was a good reminder for me too, because I am on the internet a lot. When I'm talking to people in real life, it's a different feel than what I'm seeing on the internet. It seems like more and more people are noticing crazy stuff going on and that there are some things that are not right happening in the United States. And hopefully we'll see more and more of that logical, level-headed people who love their country but also want to see it improved. I do agree with him that it's not inherently bad to be patriotic, but it does become a problem when you're so set in your ways and you think that we're doing everything great and there's nothing that needs to be changed. That's when it becomes a problem. I love patriotism where you can really respect where you are and your country, but also are not blind to things that could be improved. So I definitely have mixed feelings about this video. I agreed with some of it. I didn't necessarily agree with other things about it. What do you guys think? Especially if you are in the United States. Did this ring true to you, or do you feel like some of these were a little bit off? Anyway, I think I have a lot to think about. But thank you so much for watching today with me, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, guys!